It's a great pleasure to follow the Honourable Lady, though I must say there was some irony in a representative of the Scottish Nationalist Party speaking in favour of following financial rules, which sometimes seems not to happen in that part of the United Kingdom. Moving to the substance of today's debate, of course, like everyone else here, I am a taxpayer, so I think we all have to declare some element of interest, and I am a corporate taxpayer under a particular hat, so I have an interest in the subject, and today, perhaps suitably for what we're discussing, is the eve of the feast of St Alphege. And honourable members will recall that St Alphege was murdered for refusing to pay higher taxes. He was in many ways the first tax martyr who, reluctant to pay an additional Danegeld, had ox bones thrown at him until he was dead. I fear, under current circumstances and with the approach taken by both front benches, we see endlessly higher taxes, and we are having metaphorical ox bones continually flung at us, Mr. Chairman, but let us hope that we do not get martyred through it. But it is appropriate to think of St Alphege because actually this is the worst bit of the budget that we are debating today turned into law. It is the bit that will be most damaging to the economy, and it is the bit that is least in the interests of the United Kingdom. So let's start with Clause 5. Clause 5 is an historic mistake. It is a major blunder being made by His Majesty's government, and it fails politically, and it fails economically. It's worth remembering why the then Chancellor, George Osborne, started to reduce corporation tax. He got the Treasury for the first time to do a dynamic assessment of the consequences of cutting a tax. And what did that dynamic assessment show? It showed that more revenue would be raised, and that is precisely what happened. More revenue came through, both in actual nominal cash terms and as a percentage of GDP. It can't just be ascribed to general economic improvement, general economic growth. It was a fundamental change in the level of corporation tax raised at a lower rate. And why was this? Well, it made the country more competitive. It encouraged people to set up businesses, and it created a system where people thought that the United Kingdom was open for business. What we are doing now is the precise opposite. And my honourable friend, the Minister, in her opening remarks, referred to our noble friend, the late Lord Lawson, most distinguished Chancellor, most effective Chancellor. But this goes against everything that he did as Chancellor. In every single budget that he presided over, he managed to abolish one tax. Why? Because he realised that simplification of the tax system was the right way to go. And he realised, and we saw more of this in the United States at the same period, that lower rates with fewer write-offs is a better way to go than higher rates and complex write-offs. And His Majesty's government today is doing the exact opposite, because the government thinks it knows better how businesses should spend their own money than businesses do for themselves. And this is fundamentally wrong. So we get a raise in the basic rate, which will hit small businesses, and it actually hits them at a higher marginal rate because between 50,000 and 250,000, it has to make up the 19% to the 25%. So we're hitting people as they get their business out of the foothills and begin to climb the mountain. We start hitting them with a high marginal rate, which isn't particularly clever. And then we say, well, you, dear business, don't know how to spend money. You're far too stupid, so we will tell you how. Which fundamentally misunderstands the British economy. It may be that we were a wonderful manufacturing economy in the 19th century. And I love the 19th century. I have a great affection for the 19th century. Some people accuse me of being the honourable member of the 19th century. I point out it's right honourable member, but never mind, and it may be earlier than that. But that is not the economy we have now. Our economy is primarily a service economy, and providing complex write-offs for investment that benefit manufacturing but hit services does not understand where our economy is based. So why on earth is the government... Of course I give way to my right honourable friend.
Hi, right honourable friend, and I agree with what he is saying. I would add, of course, that it's not, even for the manufacturing sector, it is obviously an extremely concerning tax situation at this time, and I'd refer him to the AstraZeneca decision recently to locating the Republic of Ireland over the UK. It is absolutely imperative that we lower our corporation tax rather than raise it, because it ultimately is the key test of our competitiveness.
My right honourable friend is right, and actually, for once, the opposition front bench was right as well, because part of the problem of the write-offs is that they're temporary. But why are they temporary? They're temporary not because that's what the government wants to do, but it's in hock to the ABR, which gets all its forecasts wrong. And all the ABR has managed to say about the write-offs is that they will bring forward investment. Now, that is not a bad thing in and of itself. But the long-term benefit is not being achieved because we insist on following what a bad forecaster tells us will happen, that actually, to the credit of the bad forecaster, it admits that what it says will happen won't happen, so we're actually doing something on the basis of something that even the forecaster says won't actually be the case when the years have passed. This cannot possibly make sense. We are making it more difficult to do business in this country, and our aim should be lower rates and fewer write-offs. That is the way to encourage business, and it's the way to grow the economy. And if you grow the economy, then you can afford the public services that you want. What we are doing at the moment is risking shrinking the economy, encouraging businesses to leave, to go and set up elsewhere, and not having the money that we need for public services. So Clause 5 is a really bad clause of this bill. It is a bad thing to be doing, and it is bad for the British economy. But I would go further, because actually, this idea that attacking corporations is a free lunch for governments is a mistake. Corporation tax is in of itself a bad tax. Why? Because it's not a tax that falls on nobody. It actually falls very directly on consumers. It comes through to consumers because businesses that are thinking of operating in this country do not care about their gross margin, they care about their net margin. So when the corporation tax rate goes up, what do? They say we either have to increase prices or reduce employment to maintain the net margin. So increasing corporation tax from 19 to 25% at a period when there is inflation in the system already is actually going to make things more inflationary as multinationals raise their prices to compensate to maintain the net margin. Or they will reduce employment. But that makes the cost of living crisis worse for people because people's incomes then fall when they're trying to deal with rising prices. And I fear that there is a view amongst politicians that you tax corporations because they don't vote. And it's therefore an easy raid to make on people who don't vote, and therefore it doesn't matter. The old saw about plucking the goose with the least amount of hissing. Unfortunately, the hissing on corporation tax is delayed, but all taxation ultimately falls on individuals, and that is true of corporation tax. That's why it's a bad tax. It's why increasing it is a mistake in these current circumstances, and it's a mistake in almost all circumstances. But the multinational minimum tax is also a mistake. And it's a mistake in terms of diplomacy, in terms of foreign policy. It was a really daft thing to agree at the G7. We had no interest in doing it. And my honourable friend, the Minister, said that they've all done it in the EU, as if that was meant to be any salve or balm in Gilead for us. Anyway, the fact that the high tax, highly inefficient, highly regulatory EU is keen on this is enough to make most people reach for the smelling salts rather than to think that it is some glorious success of His Majesty's government. Why is it a bad idea? It is a bad idea because it deprives of ambition. My right honourable friend, the Chancellor of the Exchequer himself, called for corporation tax to come down to 12.5%. Well, we're now legislating to make my right honourable friend's own ambition impossible. This is not usually something that governments do. They normally try and ease their way through to something that they have set out, even if they recognise the circumstances are not immediately possible in which to do it. But the other reason that it's wrong and deprives us of ambition is that it is about settling for a high tax, inefficient world. I think Angela Merkel, former German Chancellor, said that we had a system where we had all this welfare and other countries didn't, and that how were we going to carry on paying for it when they were so competitive? It's a quotation from her a few years ago. And what we're trying to do is to make the whole of the rest of the world as uncompetitive as we have allowed ourselves to become. This is surely not the answer. The answer is to make ourselves more competitive and therefore to have and to be able to afford lower taxation. And instead of looking at those countries that have low tax regimes as pariahs, we should look at them as models. Instead of saying Ireland, with its low tax rate, is doing something scandalous and should be punished, we should say no. Ireland has got more from corporation tax than it gets from value-added tax. We don't get a fraction of the money from VAT and corporation tax because we have a much higher rate and we have not attracted the businesses Ireland has attracted. My honourable friend.
I'm very grateful for my honourable friend giving way. Well, somewhat sorry to interrupt you, but I'm just interested in his views on his international competitiveness. One of the issues that the Minister said about the application of global minimum tax will affect companies that have a large amount of their asset base in intangible assets. Those are primarily in the more advanced countries, Western democratic countries, which will find it much harder to justify some of the deductions that they can make from that amount of tax that they'll be subject to global minimum tax. What is this consideration about the global political impact of that for the competitiveness of our advanced economies versus China? And also the other implication about the valuation of pensions, many of which are invested in companies which will be disproportionately affected by this piece of legislation.
Well, my honourable friend is absolutely spot on that intellectual property rights are, of their nature, much harder to tax. But they clearly belong in the country that invented them or owns the intellectual right, which is a saleable asset. Now, if that is in a low-tax jurisdiction, why should it be taxed at a falsely high rate? And if you are Disney and you make a plastic Disney character in China, where is the value? It's not actually in the plastic toy being created. It is in the fact that millions of people like watching Disney characters. And therefore, trying to locate where that tax ought to be paid is an extremely complex issue and not one that is solved by a minimum tax. All that does is make it less efficient for companies to invest and develop and to do things here. They might as well do it somewhere else. They might as well actually do it in China because China doesn't seem to be very enthusiastic about this minimum tax anyway. So I don't think it will succeed in stopping complexity. Indeed, it adds to complexity of the system, and you only have to look at the finance bill to see quite how much. And the Minister, to her credit, did admit this and said it was so important we debated it, which I thoroughly agree with. But the dozens of pages of schedules and of clauses that we have on this are making our system fundamentally more complex. But my right honourable friend, the member for Whittam, raised the issue of tax sovereignty. Now, we got into a terrible muddle by signing up in the European Union to a minimum rate for VAT. We thought at the time it was a success because actually they wanted to be able to set a unified rate, and we just got a minimum rate agreed. But what that led to was suddenly finding that it was impossible to lower VAT rates, as we discussed during the Brexit debate, and as we still can't do in Northern Ireland, where we are stuck with VAT rates still being set according to the minimum agreed at the European Union. So you remove flexibility, you remove sovereignty, you increase complexity, you make it less competitive for business, and you are selling the pass on becoming a tax-efficient, tax-competitive country. But tax competition is a good thing for those of us on this side of the House who are meant to be capitalists. I accept the socialists don't want to do that. That's fair enough. That's what they believe in. But we believe in growing economies through free market solutions. And therefore, we believe that if we've got a lower tax rate than Germany, that is a good thing because it makes our economy more competitive and makes the British people richer than the Germans. It's not something we're achieving currently, but which I would like to achieve, Mr. Evans. And I'm sure that the independent chairman seemed to be nodding at that, but I'm sure Hansard will not take any notice of his agreement that he would like us to be richer than the Germans. So what this is about is failed economic orthodoxy of an undynamic kind that is leading to the increase in corporation tax, when the evidence from George Osborne showed that that is not true. So Clause 5 is a mistake. And then the multinational minimum tax is about making globally the rest of the world as inefficient as the European behemoth has become. And that is the wrong approach to be taking. Where is our ambition? Where is our vision? Where is our free market approach?